Hi guys, welcome back, and hello if you are new. I hope all of you are having a fantastic week so far, and forgive the slight redness of my eyes. I don't know what it is, but I've got a bit of an allergic reaction at the moment, but nothing is going to stop me from reviewing this week's album. So it might have taken 6 years and probably the craziest production process ever that a band has experienced, but Obliviscaris are at long last back with their brand new album, Exul. If you might not have heard of Obliviscaris before, their sound is kind of like an amalgam of progressive, classical, death metal, black metal, and all sorts of other little bits in between. Their songs are typically quite long and very progressive and have multiple movements to them normally. And there's a huge amount of depth that's in their albums, which definitely warrant multiple listens, but also allows for more reward with multiple listens. And the band are formed of 2 guitarists, 2 singers, a violinist, a drummer, and a bassist. So there's a hell of a lot of sounds going on here. And there's quite a lot to unpack, but the genius of their sound is that it's never ever overbearing, despite the huge amount of instruments that are on display here. Thematically, this album tackles the idea of exile and a lot more. And it's multiple different layers of exile. It varies from the physical act of exile, but also the exile that a lot of us felt during the pandemic, which was, being outsiders from our norm. And particularly the band, with all of its members really kind of scattered all over the globe, it was a real nightmare to really kind of put this album together. But you'll be able to find out a lot more about that in an interview that I did with Tim, which will be going up this week. And I hugely urge you to watch, because I think it's really going to make you appreciate Exul just that much more. Each of their records has seen the band kind of grow, but I think with Exul, this is where the leap is really prominent. They have well and truly succeeded in creating a rich, cohesive, and incredibly fluid tapestry in this album. You can tell that every single detail has been examined in the minutiae to make sure that it is taking you on that audible journey. And the key here is that Obliviscaris never lose the listener. They have songs which are 13 minutes, for example, like the opening track, Equus, but they always have these melodic anchor points. And when you listen to a Obliviscaris album, it is all-encompassing, and particularly the sort of main section of this album, which is Misericord 1 and 2. 2 absolutely incredible songs. And with this signature idea of putting 2 songs together to essentially create a 20-minute song, those anchor points are even more essential, and it's even more important that they land all the way they do. And thankfully on this album, they very much do. And the cinematic feel of this album, I think, lends it to having the properties of like a play or, an actual film. The album starts off with Equus, which is, a 13-minute long track. It's quite a lot to kind of get through. And then the meat and potatoes really is Misericord 1 and 2. Then there's a dramatic shift in tone, I think, when the ending of Misericord 2 happens, and then we're moved into kind of a darker tone with Spire, and then you get the climactic growl before we have the epilogue of Anhedonia. So it's so important that that sense of narrative is really nailed when you've got something like that you're trying to achieve. Vocal melodies are so much more well thought out, and they have even more hooks about them. But I also think there's a bit more of an emphasis on Zen, which is even more refreshing. So if you don't know, Zen is kind of the man who handles all of the heavier side of the vocals. His screams are always really well timed and contrast beautifully against Tim's kind of more crooning sound. And then the 2 of them coalesce to create those moments where all the instruments come together and make for such a more cathartic experience. There's sections on Misericord 2, Spire, but also Equus as well. Where you're kind of like, oh, something big is coming. And it's usually when everything kind of slows back down, and then it's kind of built up and slowly adding more and more until we get to this crescendo. And on Exul, where Violin is concerned, less is definitely more for this album. Don't get me wrong, there is some shredding, but I think with this record, it's very much about implanting those melodies with the way that the violin works. And in turn, it makes both the guitar and the violin stand out even more because less is more. And then, you have that sense of contrast. And particularly, I really loved it in Spire, where there's that sort of lead trade-off between violin and guitar. And it really emphasizes that even more when you've not heard it for a while. And despite saying less is more, there are some amazing guitar solos on here, which, is very much more is more. One of them is Misericord Part 2, which is a 1.5 minute solo, which to me speaks to the craft of the guitarist and how they've put this solo together, because you're able to keep someone engaged for 1.5 minutes of just guitar solos. That's not an easy thing to do. And it's a constant tug of war between this tension that the band are creating and then this massive release that we get. Truthfully, I don't think we've seen just how far this excellent band can go. But until then, Exul is very much the top barometer to beat. Absolute masterpiece, without a doubt, an album of the year. 9 out of 10 for me. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant record. So I hope you guys enjoyed this album review. Let me know what you think in the comments underneath me. I'll also be putting out my Q&A video very, very shortly, so stay tuned to that, and I will see you guys very, very soon for another album review. Take care, my friends.